I started the Real Mental podcast because it bugs me when film and TV miss the mark about how mental health gets portrayed. Real Mental is a podcast where a film loving psychiatrist, that's me, talks to a film critic to help people figure out their lives by getting to the truth about mental health in the movies. Welcome, Shane Conto, to the Real Mental podcast again.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to chatting about this film today.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about the film Anora. And before we start, why don't you just remind the listeners who you are and what you do?
Yes, thank you. So, primarily in terms of like film and everything, I have been running my own YouTube channel for 8 years now. So, I review all types of films, do some weekly shows. I write for cinephile.com. I have my own website as well and do different podcasts for the SPDM Crew Podcasting Network. So, talk a lot of movies. So, I'm always looking forward to checking out new opportunities to do so. And I've certainly had a lot of fun coming onto your show. So I'm happy to be back.
That's great. Well, let's talk about Anora. What did you think of this movie?
Oh, I love this. And I have seen Sean Baker's work from like Tangerine to Florida Project to Red Rocket. And I feel like this film really feels like some form of advancement in terms of like his filmmaking and grossing experience. And it's a very unexpected experience. Cause like even if you watch the trailers, you basically get the idea of like the first third of the movie. And there's so much more to this. And, you know, this is being sold as like a new aged pretty woman. And maybe for a little bit. And it is much more than that. It's thrilling, it's intense, and it winds up having so much emotion and so many deep themes about trauma and how we how we express connections with other human beings, and a lot of classism for sure in terms of judgment, and all wrapped up in a crazy thrilling movie that has plenty of energy.
Yeah, it was fun because, I was thinking about TIFF, the Toronto International Film Festival this year, and I wrote a blog called TIFF 24, the Year of Subverted Expectations, and how a
Mhm.
lot of the films I saw sort of hinted at going in one direction and then sort of veered in a different direction, and Anora was one of them. And I'm sure you remember the scene right at the beginning after she meets Ivan, that
Mhm.
they're negotiating a price for her to spend time with him, and they throw back and forth the same lines of dialogue that Richard
Mhm.
Gere and Julia Roberts threw about, how they were negotiating the price. I would have taken it for this much and I would
Yeah.
have paid you this much. And, so Sean Baker is very deliberately, dangling the pretty woman
Mhm.
trope in front of us and then completely subverts it. So I thought that was really fun
Mhm.
because it wasn't accidental. It was very deliberate, even using the dialogue.
Exactly, and it sets the stage for a very much a new age, a much more graphic expression of that film, and then really giving you a sobering experience of like, this kind of situation probably wouldn't have a happy ending. And this film takes you on a really unfortunate journey that this young woman who, at the beginning of the film seems to have like she has her situation figured out for what she needs to. She's good at her job and she gets this unbelievable opportunity that completely changes her life. And then this film takes you, the audience, along with Anora on this just like unfortunately crashing down to reality, and it does it in such a entertaining way. This film is like 2 hours and 19 minutes and never feels slow. It's always moving and keeping up that energy, and it has that kind of feel of like an After Hours or an Uncut Gems where it's like this person is wind up in a situation and there's just complete nonsense and mayhem going on around this person and just trying to process it all. And there's really unexpected dynamics that grow, connections that happen, and it all feels so very real. There's very relatable moments of, they're like walking around the boardwalk, and it's like, do we drive? Do we walk? It's only 5 minutes away. And it's just like, is it though? And we've all had moments like that where it's very human and very authentic in its presentation, despite being so big film kind of feel around it.
Yeah. And one of the things I really liked about it was the psychology because
Mhm.
Anora was not a one-dimensional person. She was really tough. She was really
Mhm.
canny. Like you said, she was really good at her job. She knew how to do her job in a way to maximize the benefit to herself.
Yeah.
And, she knew how to negotiate the relationships with the other women in the strip club where she worked, even the ones that were more like nemesis to her rather than
Yes.
allies. So she was really very good at everything, but, she was still vulnerable and still very much subject to that dream that when someone presents you with an offer that's really too good to be true, to engage in that kind of magical thinking and want to believe that it's a possibility. And I also really love the psychology of the young man Ivan because,
Mhm.
in many ways, he seemed so much younger than Honora, even though I'm sure they were supposed to be seen as around the same age, early 20s. But
Mhm.
he sometimes he seemed like a 17-year-old, like a puppy,
Yeah.
and I think that's because he was so spoiled and never had to have any work or any responsibility. He was supposedly in college in the States, and yet he was, just getting high and partying all the time and just wasting his parents' money and spending it, profligately. But he was a baby and he wasn't a man. Whereas Annie, Anora, was much more a young woman. He was a little boy. And his psychology was interesting because at the first sign of trouble, Anora fought. She fought. She fought physically, she fought emotionally, she fought for what she wanted. He he chickened out. He was such a
Yep.
coward. He ran with his tail between his legs, almost literally. So it was just so interesting the psychology of those people. Another one I really liked was the psychology of the two hired henchmen.
Mhm.
And the one who was, the supposedly more serious guy, the religious guy, he was, much more scary on some level. And then there was the supposedly brutish thug who showed such a tender side to himself and who, in a sense, allowed Annie to just be herself, especially at the end, and to just have her feelings, to have her experience. So all the psychology of the people rang so true, I felt.
Yeah, this film has such an interesting ensemble of characters because you go in expecting, like, yes, we're gonna have Annie, we're gonna have Yvonne, and then this whole unexpected twist of events occurs where you're stuck with this trio of lackeys, more or less, for Yvonne's parents. And each of them have a very different approach to this situation. You see them code switching in terms of like when they're interacting with her versus how they two of them at least become like groveling yes men to the parents when they show up. And it is that classism, it's that dynamic of how they have to navigate life and how they can be just so terrified by these two people that for the vast majority of the film they're just kind of like a specter floating over the whole proceedings of it. But Igor, who we perceive right off the bat, he's the hired like muscle. And you expect him to just be a hired muscle. And there's so much to this character that we wind up finding out and layers being pulled back. And I loved that character because he is an observer. He really understands who Annie is over the course of this wild night. I guess what turns into a couple of days that they wind up spending with each other. And it's just their increasing interactions become the most interesting part of the film, all the way up to their final interaction that winds up saying so much about both of them and just laying so much emotion out in front of the audience for you to process and just take in the end.
Yeah, and what I loved was the contrast because you have the quote unquote fairy tale romance, the love story between Annie and Yvonne, and then you have this other kind of relationship between Annie and Igor, which seems much more genuine,
Mhm.
much more meaningful, much less superficial, and like it has actual potential to go somewhere in the future. So it's just very interesting because, the rich playboy who's really a boy
Yes.
is one potential love interest, and obviously lots of money that he could throw at her. But then there's a different kind of richness, which is the emotional richness of Igor.
Mhm.
And, he's got nothing, doesn't have two shekels to rub together. And yet he's a man of substance. He's a man.
Yes, and he cares enough to spend the time to understand her, and he sticks up for her, trying to get the parents to apologize for everything that Anora had to go through in this whole entire journey here. And just Yvonne is such a child. And like you realize that from like how he interacts, like even just like the little things where like they shake hands and he's like and he's just sitting there playing video games. Like literally all he wants to do all day is play video games and then have sex. And then even the sex that's happening is so immature and so one-sided and lacks any kind of understanding of intimacy. And to the point where like she even has to help him get a better understanding, like this is how this is supposed to go. And watching this with my wife, the one recurring thing that my wife kept bringing up the whole entire movie is, how many times they show sexual intercourse in this film. She never really gets pleasure the whole entire time. And up until very much towards the end of this film, where you really get to see underneath like her feelings and what this all means, because very much so, she has gotten so used to her experience and what sex means in her life and what sex means in her interactions with others, where she doesn't even really understand true intimacy or knows how to accept it. And that just is represented such a powerful way by the end of this film. And there's just so many layers of emotion that you can just dig into in this film.
Yeah, she seems like a young person who has gone through a lot. When she's saying about her family, she's saying, "Oh yeah, my sister is, like this, and my mom, I don't know, she's in Florida with her man." It's like
Mhm.
like she doesn't really have good parenting,
Yeah.
and she's obviously had to become very tough very young. And yeah, it's like she doesn't quite know how to be loved, what it
Mhm.
means to be loved, what it means to be valued as a person, not just as an object who provides a service. And yeah, it's funny because this kind of nightmare scenario for her
Mhm.
has the potential, if we think of the sad ending as also a potential beginning, it has the potential for her to learn what real intimacy is, what love could look like, could feel like, what being with somebody who sees her not just as a commodity, but sees her as a human being. Because I
Mhm.
think Igor really sees her, like you said, as a human being. So she has the potential to experience something very different because of this kind of awful situation. So even though it doesn't have the Pretty Woman ending,
Mhm.
it has the potential for something even better, right? Which is something real between two human beings who are, I think, much better suited to one
Yeah.
another.
This ending on the surface, like if you think plot wise, it's a downer ending because how the plot, the beats of what this story you thought it
Yeah,
was going to be ends up.
yeah,
And it also, on the surface, is a down ending because of, how the film ends in that last scene. But in actuality, it's a very big growth moment
yes,
for both of these
yes,
characters. And it is that possibility that makes this such an impactful and poignant ending where it's like, you know what? If they give this a try, there might be two people in this situation who wind up happy because of this.
yeah,
And that's very moving and impactful.
yeah,
And that's what really ties this film together. And I give so much credit to Mikey Madsen, who I really hope gets a lot of attention when it comes to award season, because up to this point, Sean Baker's films really haven't gotten like that big kind of attention. And the fact that this one the Palme d'Or and really got that kind of attention. I'm really hoping that she does specifically from this film, and I would be happy if, like, say, Sean Baker got recognized for Best Director for this because this film plays with expectations and tone so perfectly and is so engaging and so layered. There's so many different ways that you can get something out of this film. You could just watch it on the surface and enjoy this crazy ride that you go on. But the farther you dig into it, there's so much more underneath the surface. And this is starting to feel like this is like Sean Baker's building up to he's doing some really special things.
And now let's pause for a quick word about my other podcast. I'm Dr. Marcia Sirota. We all need to be inspired and uplifted these days. We need a good laugh and we need to be moved. In the Ruthless Compassion podcast, I speak with a wonderfully diverse group of people. They've overcome daunting obstacles and they're making unique, exciting contributions to our communities and to our world. The Ruthless Compassion podcast is at 145 episodes and counting. Why not have a listen to it today? Yeah, you could see it as a thriller, as a comedy, as a
Mhm.
drama, as a romance, as a combination. Yeah, it's sort of a multi-genre. Getting back to, the ending, which I'm not going to reveal, but it just struck me how, it gave Anora an opportunity to really be vulnerable, but it also
Mhm.
gave Igor an opportunity. And it's like both of these characters got to kind of break out of the mold that they had been stuck in because of their circumstances,
Yeah.
really probably through no choice of their own because of their own situations. He came from this very poor place and, he had very few options. He's a big, strong guy, so he gets to be a muscle, right? And,
Mhm.
maybe that's not really who he is. He looks more like someone with the soul of a poet. But, here he is in his situation, here she is in her situation, and they're both kind of just doing what was expected of them or, the best that they can do under the circumstances. And they both kind of got to see through each other a different way to be. Maybe they'll keep their jobs, but maybe they
Mhm.
have a different way of envisioning themselves and their possibilities, at least an emotional level. And I thought that was really interesting because they both kind of, through the interaction with each other, went on a similar journey of
Mhm.
awakening. And I really liked that. It wasn't just her awakening, it was his as well. And interestingly enough, Ivan had zero awakening. You
0.
know,
Just
zero growth, no arc, no character arc.
it was more of a reinforcement for the audience, us fully understanding who he really is as a person, and unfortunately for Annie, also realizing that as we're realizing it. And there's a particular moment where you really see his true colors, and it's so that just hits so hard sitting there watching this film. But yeah, this film, so much of the story on the surface is about rising up from your circumstances, because that is the Pretty Woman story. It's this fairy tale type story. It's Cinderella, just, with sex workers instead. And instead, you, like you put so well, having both of these characters elevating themselves in terms of like who
Mhm.
they are and realizing what they really want out of it. And what I really liked about Igor as a character and the performance was yes, what is our expectation of this bald, muscular man who's there as the enforcer for what obviously is some level of, organized mafia or something like that? He's so unserious in certain moments. Like, there's a moment where they're like walking across the boardwalk and he just like spins and just flicks a bat how far, and it's just like those are the little moments where you start to realize like this isn't who like we expect him to really be, to be honest. Because like in the scene right before it, he does some things that you would expect, except there's little moments like at one point you could tell he's just like poking the bat at like this little thing, and there's fun in those little moments. And I think that's a special thing about this film is the closer you pay attention, there's
Yeah.
so many little moments for these characters that so few of the characters in this film feel like just archetypes or cliches. They all have so much depth and layers to their character. And God, I just wanted them to get the one guy to the hospital because he obviously had a concussion, and that just kept like spiraling throughout this whole entire movie. He was having like the worst day. of his
Yeah.
whole entire life. And we've all had one of those days, and that's what makes it so relatable and fun.
Yeah. I was thinking also, how these characters were, yeah, like they're so non-traditional, non-archetypal. They're not like your typical Hollywood movie characters.
Mhm,
And they kept surprising us and they kept even surprising themselves, I think. And I thought that was so wonderful, because you just couldn't predict what was going to happen next. Even
mhm,
as you were kind of suspecting that it was going in a certain direction, it still kept surprising you and it surprised you in a way that was very human. It's because people can sometimes really
mhm.
surprise you and you sort of go like, "Oh, I didn't expect that of them." And I love that about the movie.
Absolutely, and I think that's something that Sean Baker does so uniquely is that everybody feels like a real person. Even if some of, like, their characterization or, like, what they do seems so outlandish, like, Red Rocket was about a porn star, and him being able to take these roles in society that we have such heavy expectations of, like this is what we perceive, and just having so much fun fleshing out these characters in ways that it's impossible to just see them as these two-dimensional drawings on a screen because the actors and the direction just add so much to them. And, I've only recognized one of the actors in this film because, like, I've seen Mikey Madsen and some other things, but, like, I wanna see the rest of these actors pop up in things because this film sold me on just how incredible work that all of these performers can do, even with just the smallest roles and just making them so authentic. And the film is shot in a way that feels like you are there. You're not just watching a movie. You feel like you're trudging along this whole entire crazy night with them and just feeling all the emotion, all the exhaustion that they're feeling because it feels so well put together and so intentional in that way.
Yeah, you also feel very much caught up in the whirlwind. You get caught up in the
Mhm,
excitement and the passion and the Vegas. They go to Vegas. But I was thinking, how another thing you were talking about, they're not these two-dimensional roles. They also really have something to say about money and power. And I
mhm,
thought it was very, very interesting that, the rich people were the bad guys in this film. And, this young man who's throwing around all this enormous amount of money, ridiculous amounts of money, and how, seductive obviously it is, but how really empty it is. And when you finally meet the parents, how very unhappy, especially the mother seems. Like they don't seem like happy, peaceful people. They seem super tense. And obviously they're in a tense situation, but like this woman does not seem like a happy woman.
mhm,
She seems like an incredibly wealthy woman, but not happy, hard, really, like certainly tougher than Annie, right? Way
mhm.
tougher. And, you wonder like what happened to her to make her so tough and so unhappy. But yeah, like I think Baker is really saying something about, be careful what you wish for, all these billions don't make you happy, don't make you
Mhm.
peaceful, don't make you feel, like your life is a good life. And maybe there's something else that can constitute a good life, like having real connections with other human beings who see you and you see them, right? So I thought it was really interesting. And they made Las Vegas look as bad as you would expect, as good, but also as bad,
Yeah.
right? And the way the concierge was like fawning over them, kicking people out of rooms to give the rich, rich,
Mhm.
rich oligarch son the rooms and stuff. It just, yeah, the ugliness of that kind of money and what it could do.
Absolutely, and I find it so interesting in terms of, like, the Las Vegas piece because when we see Vegas for the first time, it is the big lights, it's the excitement and everything, and I think it's very intentional when we go back the next time, literally the only thing we see is the beginning of the strip and then being stuck in this little cramped office, and the realization of, like, this is what Vegas is in the daytime, um, and the reality of it all. But
Yeah.
there's so much to, like, dig into and think of when it comes to Yvonne's parents, and all of it's speculation because we don't really get any kind of
Yeah.
backstory, but you get a sense that, like, his mother probably came from somewhere where she had to be tough, And, like, on some twisted level, I get the sense that, like, maybe she was from, like, a lower class because the dad seems so aloof to
Yeah.
just everything, and the fact that, like, he's afraid of his wife, first of all, because he made was it Terrace or Karis give the bad news to the wife because
Yeah.
he didn't wanna do it,
Yeah.
and then the most emotion we saw from him was him just cackling laughing because of what happened. And it's such an interesting thing because I feel like, and this obviously is speculation, that there's probably some connection between the mother character and where she came from, and probably closer to Annie than maybe that mother character is willing to admit. But just years of obviously what it seems like displeasure and just being engulfed in money has made her just such a miserable person.
Well, it's a
And it,
prison, right?
yeah.
But, yeah, I think that's such a great point, that she's similar to Annie because when you think about it, what do you hate the most? What are you the most uncomfortable with? What pushes your buttons the most? It's what's similar to you and to
Mhm,
parts of you that you don't want to face, that you don't want to
mhm.
admit, that you don't want to show others, right? So if Annie is kind of a version of her old self that's being rubbed in her face, and her son, her precious son that she's tried to keep away from that,
Yep.
is now, involved with this, obviously that would be her worst nightmare. And her husband maybe is chuckling because it's like, been there, done that kind of
Yep.
thing. But the last thing she wants is for a repeat of that kind of a thing. Yeah.
Absolutely, and that's the kind of film that this is. There's so many fun characters in here to just think, like, where did they come from? Like, what got them to this place? And it's the kind of film that you could keep thinking about for days and weeks after. When I saw this like 5, 6 days ago, and I'm still thinking about it every day. So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's so, so fascinating because, all these characters, everybody is terrified, except Annie initially, of the parents, right? The
yep,
priest, the thugs, the son,
yep,
right? Everybody is terrified. And then Annie just keeps fighting. And then there's this one confrontation between her and the mother. And the mother basically lays the cards out on the table. And it's like, oh, okay. And, in Hollywood, Annie would just, fight back and, win. And in Sean Baker's movie, Annie goes, oh, I know when I'm licked, and
yep,
just give up. And, it's like, okay, I'm not going to fight you because you're going to, literally destroy me and everyone around me. So that was so interesting because
mhm,
again, it's not what you would expect. Like she got it. She got what she was dealing with, and it was way bigger than one little young woman. She was dealing with billionaire mafiosi,
mhm,
and she didn't really stand a chance. And I loved the way this was not Hollywood. This was a lot of reality. It was very
mhm.
fun and exciting and dramatic, but there was a lot of truth in there, and it was not sugar coated.
Well, and every turn that this film takes, every place that it takes us is interesting. And that's what makes it so compelling and what makes this film move and why it almost 2 hours and 20 minutes, you're just locked in the whole entire time.
Yeah, I'm surprised, I saw it at the festival, so it was a while ago, and I don't remember it being 2 hours and 20 minutes. It really felt like a typical, hour and a half film. It just went so quickly, and it was so rich and so enjoyable, even when it was sad and hard.
Mhm.
It was so enjoyable, and you're right, Mikey Madison was, like, so good. I heard her being interviewed on the radio, and she was saying how she really loved the character and she really, really like felt protective toward her and really wanted to honor her. And she did a ton of studying to be able to play the role. Like she really immersed herself in order to get it right. And I think it's just a masterful performance and so sincere and so raw and open and really like Oscar worthy for sure. Now,
Mhm.
will, the Academy recognize her? It's a political being, so who knows? But for
Yeah.
sure, I think, like what you said, she definitely merits all the awards. We'll see what happens. But yeah, I thought it was just incredible. And for such a young person to be this accomplished.
Absolutely, and the fact that she put in the work and made all the aspects of her performance so believable, and for an actor portraying a character that could potentially be so uncomfortable, because it is very raw, it's very vulnerable, whether it's emotionally or physically at different points in this film, and If this film was just thrown on and I did not know that these were actors, it'd be hard to tell that they were actors because they all felt so real.
Yeah, and psychologically, they felt so real, and so much the time when I'm looking at movies, I'm thinking, "This wouldn't happen, and this
Mhm,
doesn't feel sincere in the person portraying it." But yes, I agree with you. You could have just walked right in off the street into their lives, and it would have been the same. Like, nobody was overacting, nobody was phoning it in on the other side, like, everyone was just right at the right place,
mhm,
just right there on that sweet spot. I was very impressed by the writing, by the cinematography, by the
mhm,
acting, by the whole story. I thought it was really masterful, and that's why I was so excited to talk to you about it today because it was
mhm.
definitely one of my favorites, not only in the year, but, in this era.
Yeah, I, ventured into Philadelphia. I usually only go in for, like, press screenings and stuff like that, but I'm like, "I wanna see this movie this weekend," and it was worth it. It 100% was worth it. This is one of my favorite films of the year.
Well, I hope that our podcast will encourage people to get out and see it because it's really special. And I would recommend that people like have a look at Pretty Woman and then compare the two films just to see the quality of the experience and just the way the story was being told. Because I think they really are parallels. And obviously, Sean Baker was making it very clear that he was making that comparison. So I would recommend
Mhm.
that people watch them both and then see how they how they feel, what they think about the two different films in contrast with one another.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've watched Pretty Woman, so I have to give it a rewatch for sure.
Yeah, it's quite different than Anora.
Yes.
Let's say similar story, but that's about it. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, this is really, really fun, Shane, talking to you about Anora. Remind people where they can find you if they want to check out any of your content.
Awesome. Thank you. So make sure to head over to the wastelandreviewer.blog, my website. That's where I promote all kinds of stuff that I do. Biggest thing is the Wasteland Reviewer YouTube channel, where you can check out all my reviews, including my solo thoughts on Anora. But thank you so much for having me on again.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Shane Conto. Thank you again for coming on the Real Mental podcast.
Thank you so much.
This is Dr. Marcia Sirota. Thanks for listening to the Real Mental Podcast. Please leave a review and your comments wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to sign up for my free newsletter at marciasirotamd.com. While you're at it, why not check out my Ruthless Compassion podcast with over 140 episodes and counting? And if you have any ideas for guests for either Real Mental or Ruthless Compassion podcasts, please email us at info@marciasirotamd.com. Happy listening!